Agriculture has never been simple. It's shaped by weather and markets, policy and politics, forces that often originate far from the farm gate. Headlines move fast, policies shift, markets react, but the impact of those changes doesn't just show up on screen, it shows up on farms and ranches, in families and rural communities. This podcast is about taking the time to explore what's happening in agriculture and what it means for the people living it, with clarity, context, and perspective. I'm Corryn La Rue, and this is Farm Unfiltered. House Republicans narrowly rescued a collapsing legislative agenda Wednesday, pushing through a procedural vote after hours of internal negotiations and ultimately passing a revised farm bill before leaving Washington for recess. The rule governing floor debate cleared the House in a 224-200 vote, but only after GOP leaders held it open for more than 2 hours to flip dissenting members. At one point, as many as 7 Republicans opposed the measure, enough to derail not only the rule, but a slate of high-priority legislation tied to national security and immigration funding. The time added urgency. Lawmakers were facing a Thursday night deadline to renew key surveillance authorities under the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, or FISA, while funding tied to immigration enforcement and federal personnel, including airport security and Secret Service operations, also hung in the balance. With no clear fallback plan, leadership worked to stabilize support, initially signaling that a multi-year farm bill would be delayed until after recess. That approach quickly shifted. Instead, Republicans moved forward with debate and amendment votes, culminating in a House passage of the farm bill Thursday. The final bill reflects the fractures that nearly sank the broader rule. Most notably, it does not include language to expand year-round sales of E15, gasoline blended with 15% ethanol, a provision that has divided Republicans for weeks. Leadership had originally planned to attach the ethanol measure to the farm bill, but internal opposition forced its removal. The E15 provision has been decoupled from the farm bill and will now be voted on after lawmakers return from recess on May 13th. Here's Politico agriculture reporter Grace Yarrow on Agriculture of America with Jesse Allen, explaining what happened leading up to the final vote and the future of the renewable fuels provision.
At the beginning of the week, we sort of expected that there were a lot of things that could go wrong. House Republican leadership had a really long list of things that they needed to get done this week, and the Farm Bill was included on that. I think a lot of folks that I was talking to at the beginning of the week thought that leaders just might punt the Farm Bill again, because the DHS funding bill they were working on and the extension of FISA, the spy law, was due this week. The Farm Bill was mostly just brought up this week because there's a ton of pressure from a lot of farm state Republicans who really want to get this done as soon as possible. But they ended up still managing to make time for it. It just happened to start at 11:30 on Wednesday. Part of the reason for things falling apart was this big debate over allowing a vote on E15 for year-round sales of E15. That was something that leaders agreed to. Again, that's something that those Midwest Republicans really wanted to get done alongside the Farm Bill. So they agreed to tack it on to the Farm Bill, and then some refiners who really opposed that plan got in touch with other Republicans who then threw a different fit over it, and then Midwest Republicans were upset. It was a whole thing. So they left a vote open for 5 hours. I was in the chamber watching the speaker meet with everybody, go back and forth. We could hear people yelling at each other in these private meetings. It was quite intense for a while, but compared to that, the Farm Bill debate was pretty tame.
I understand it, and a lot of folks in farm country understand it now, is that there's this side agreement that you guys reported on that to essentially decouple E15 and then come back and try for a standalone vote in May. Am I saying that right?
Yes, it's a strange way that they tried to sort of bring these two bills together because E15 isn't technically an ag committee jurisdiction, which is why it wasn't just in the Farm Bill to begin with. But yeah, so basically they'll have to come back in May and do a different vote to remove the the combination of E15 and the Farm Bill, because until then they can't send the Farm Bill over to the Senate until they pass E15. But once they come back, they all agreed to decouple these two. Then they are supposed to have a vote on E15 on May 13th. That's what we've been told is the agreement. That's what House Ag Chair G.T. Thompson said on the House floor yesterday. But I think there's a lot of anxiety between now and then about what concessions could be made in that E15 plan, especially from those oil state lawmakers who are pretty pissed.
Farm state lawmakers had pushed hard for the E15 expansion, arguing it would provide certainty for ethanol producers and fuel markets. But others raised concerns about refinery compliance costs tied to Environmental Protection Agency regulations, creating a split that leadership ultimately couldn't bridge in time. Representative Zach Nunn of Iowa, who supports both the Farm Bill and the ethanol provision, was among those working behind the scenes to keep both priorities alive. At one point during negotiations, he called out to Speaker Mike Johnson to continue discussions before stepping off the floor. In the end, Republicans opted to move the broader Farm Bill forward without the ethanol language, leaving that fight unresolved and likely to resurface either in Senate negotiations or as standalone legislation. The final package also strips out several other contentious provisions. Language that would have provided liability protections for pesticide manufacturers, a measure tied to ongoing litigation over products such as Bayer's Roundup, was removed following opposition from members including Representative Anna Paulina Luna of Florida. Here's Politico's Grace Yarrow with more.
That was one of the most interesting things to watch this week. We weren't sure if that was going to get an amendment vote on the floor. It was a huge win for the Make America Healthy Again movement. We had a lot of folks who were in town for the Supreme Court hearing of Monsanto v. Durnell earlier this week. So a lot of them were on the Hill meeting with Republicans, really pushing to strip this pesticide language out of the Farm Bill. And they were successful. GT and other Republicans who were concerned about pesticide labels were trying to explain to their colleagues and, see if they could get enough votes to shoot this amendment down, but Democrats supported it as well. So yeah, I think honestly, the Senate was probably going to take that language out anyway because they have to reach that 60 vote threshold over there. And Senator Bozeman has told me he knows he can't do as much as GT can over in the House. So the language was probably going to get stripped anyway, but it did happen sooner than I expected.
Other priorities were left on the cutting room floor as well. Amendments related to conservation funding and regulatory reforms were not made in order, frustrating some members. Representative Lauren Boebert of Colorado, who initially opposed the rule after being blocked from offering amendments, ultimately voted in favor after securing assurances she would be involved in House-Senate negotiations. She said, quote, "I'm a yes in good faith on negotiations that I will be able to deliver the promises I made to my farmers and ranchers. I will be a conferee on the Farm Bill, and I think that's very important," unquote. Opposition to the ethanol provision remained a central sticking point throughout. Representative Harriet Hagman of Wyoming said commitments from leadership to revisit the issue helped secure her support, emphasizing the need to balance biofuel expansion with refinery protections. With House passage complete, the Farm Bill now heads to the Senate, where many of the unresolved issues, including E15, pesticide liability protections, and sidelined amendment priorities, are expected to reemerge as lawmakers work to reconcile competing versions of the legislation. Here's Grace and Jesse again.
With the Senate now, with the prospects there, I've heard a lot of probably the same things you have heard, that the differences in policy over in the Senate, and again, as I was reminded this week on Capitol Hill, everything is a math equation. There's going to be probably some substantial differences with the Farm Bill on the Senate side. Would you say that's right?
Absolutely. One of the big things I'm watching going forward, first of all, is just a timeline, which we don't know yet in terms of when the Senate will have Farm Bill text to work on. So I'm watching that, but also that Democrats are really hoping that Republicans will agree to undo some of the cuts to SNAP spending that they passed last year. That's really angered them. It's sort of the dark cloud over all of these Farm Bill negotiations is debates over SNAP and how much to fund nutrition aid. So Democrats could try and get Republicans to concede there if they're able to withhold support. I do expect just more broadly that the Senate version will just need to be a little bit more focused on those bipartisan bills, which the House version has dozens of, but that Senator Bozeman probably won't be able to do anything on pesticides, maybe even Prop 12, depending how Democrats say, if they threaten to withhold support, he can't just pass it with only Republican support.
The House-passed Farm Bill includes language backed by some lawmakers, including Representative Randy Feenstra, aimed at addressing California's Proposition 12, a long-contested provision for livestock producers that has been central to Farm Bill negotiations. While the measure remains politically divisive and is expected to face scrutiny in the Senate, House supporters argue it represents a step toward limiting the law's impact on interstate pork production. Despite the internal divisions, the rule's passage allowed Republicans to move forward on several time-sensitive priorities beyond agriculture. That includes a compromise to extend FISA authorities for 3 years and a budget resolution tied to a filibuster-proof immigration funding package backed by the Trump administration. That's it for today. As always, the goal here is to better understand what's happening in agriculture and what it means beyond the headlines. I'm Corryn La Rue, and this is Farm Unfiltered.